Inside Sing Sing prison, locked away forever. There's a place where the past never lets go? Where men wake up every morning to the same walls, the same bars, the same reality, knowing that nothing outside is waiting for them anymore. Not freedom. Not redemption. Not even time, in the way the rest of the world understands it. Because inside Sing Sing prison, time doesn't move forward. It circles. Day after day. Year after year. Sentence after sentence. And for some men here, it never ends. What you're about to see isn't just a prison. It's a system built to control, to isolate, and in some cases, to break a man completely. And what happens inside these walls is far worse than most people imagine. Before we step any further inside, take a moment to subscribe and tell me where you're watching from. Because the reality of Sing Sing reaches far beyond these walls. This prison sits just 30 miles north of New York City, close enough that on a quiet day, you can hear trains passing by, carrying people to jobs, to families, to freedom. But inside Sing Sing, those sounds mean something different. They are reminders. Reminders of a life that continues, without you. This place has been standing since 1826. Nearly 2 centuries of confinement. Nearly 2 centuries of stories, some violent, some tragic, and some so quiet, they're almost invisible. But every one of them leads to the same question. What does it really mean, to be locked away forever? To understand that, we have to go back to the beginning. Because Sing Sing wasn't just built to hold prisoners. It was built to change the way punishment works. And what started here would shape prisons across America for generations. Built by the condemned. Sing Sing began with a simple idea. If you want control, you don't just lock people up. You make them build the place that will hold them. In 1825, a group of inmates were transported up the Hudson River from Auburn Prison. They weren't brought here to serve time. They were brought here to work. Chained together, watched constantly, and forced to cut stone from the very land beneath their feet. Every wall they built, every block they lifted, every structure they raised, was part of the prison they would soon live inside. There was no illusion of freedom. No negotiation. Just labor. Endless, exhausting labor. And silence. Because from the very beginning, Sing Sing wasn't just about confinement. It was about discipline, control, and psychological pressure. The men who built this prison didn't just shape stone. They helped create something far more lasting. A system where punishment wasn't just physical. It was mental. And once that system was complete, there was no turning back. Because what happened next would define life inside Sing Sing for decades. The silence that broke men. Inside early Sing Sing, there was one rule above all others. Silence. No talking. Not during meals. Not during work. Not even in passing. The idea was simple: if inmates couldn't communicate, they couldn't organize, resist, or rebel. But something unexpected happened. Instead of creating order, silence created pressure. Imagine living day after day, surrounded by hundreds of other men, and never hearing a voice. Never expressing a thought. Never releasing frustration, anger, fear. All of it building quietly inside you. Men began to change. Some became withdrawn, disconnected from reality. Others became unpredictable, their emotions compressed into something unstable. Because when you remove a man's ability to speak, you don't remove his thoughts. You trap them. And trapped thoughts don't disappear. They evolve. They harden. They find other ways out. In coded knocks against walls? In glances across corridors? In silent agreements formed without words. And eventually, in violence. Because inside Sing Sing, silence didn't create peace. It created tension. And tension always finds a breaking point. A day that never changes. A typical day inside Sing Sing doesn't begin with choice. It begins with control. Before sunrise, the prison wakes up. Not gradually, not peacefully, but abruptly. Lights snap on. Keys turn. Doors rattle. Count time. Every inmate must stand, visible, accounted for. Because in a place like this, knowing exactly where everyone is the only thing keeping order intact. After count, movement begins. But nothing here is casual. Every step is structured. Every movement observed. Inmates line up, walk in formation, keep their heads down. Breakfast comes quickly. There's no conversation, no lingering. Just food eaten under watchful eyes. Then comes work or confinement. Some inmates spend hours in workshops, kitchens, or maintenance units, jobs that break the monotony, even slightly. Others remain in controlled spaces, repeating the same routine hour after hour. And that's where time begins to feel different. Because inside Sing Sing, time doesn't feel like progress. It feels like repetition. Days blur together. One becomes indistinguishable from the next. And over time, something strange happens. You stop measuring life in days or weeks, and start measuring it in routines, counts, meals, lock-ins. That becomes your world. But the hardest part is what lies just outside. Because Sing Sing isn't isolated in the middle of nowhere. It sits right beside the Hudson River. On the other side, there are homes, roads, people living normal lives. And sometimes, if you listen closely, you can hear them. Laughter, cars passing, trains moving, freedom within earshot, but completely out of reach. And that is where the real psychological weight begins. Because seeing freedom is one thing, but knowing you'll never have it again is something else entirely. The real rules of survival. There are official rules inside Sing Sing. Rules written by the administration. But those aren't the ones that determine whether you survive. The real rules come from the inmates. And they are enforced without warning. When someone new arrives, they step into a system that already exists. Unspoken, unwritten, but very real. The first lesson is awareness. Where you sit, who you look at, how long you look, even something as small as standing in the wrong place, can create tension. And tension can turn into conflict faster than you expect. Respect is the foundation of everything. Not respect in the traditional sense, but a kind of mutual understanding. You don't interfere. You don't take what isn't yours. You don't cross boundaries. And most importantly, you don't show weakness. Because weakness draws attention. And attention can put you in situations you can't control. Inside Sing Sing, reputation matters. Not just who you are, but how others perceive you. And once that perception is set, it's almost impossible to change. But here's the part most people don't realize. Even if you follow every rule, even if you avoid conflict, even if you stay completely to yourself, there are still things you can't control. Because sometimes, the danger doesn't come from other inmates. It comes from the environment itself. And what happens next is something every inmate fears. Solitary confinement, the quiet punishment. Solitary confinement isn't loud. It isn't chaotic. It isn't violent, at least not in the way people expect. It's quiet. Too quiet. A man is placed inside a small cell, alone. No interaction. No conversation. No distraction. Just time. Endless time. At first, it might not seem unbearable. But as hours turn into days, and days into something longer, the silence begins to change shape. Thoughts become louder. Memories become sharper. Regrets become heavier. And without anything to break that cycle, the mind starts to turn inward. Some inmates pace constantly, trying to hold on to structure. Others withdraw completely, lying still for hours, letting time pass without meaning. Because in solitary, there's nothing to measure it against. No routine. No interaction. Just existence. And eventually, that isolation does something irreversible. It changes how a person thinks, how they react, how they see themselves. And when they come out, they're not the same. That's the part most people don't see. Solitary confinement doesn't just punish behavior, it reshapes identity. And inside Sing Sing, that kind of change can determine everything that comes next. But even that isn't the darkest part of Sing Sing. Because deeper inside this prison, there's a place that once decided who lived and who didn't. A place where footsteps meant final moments, and where the system showed its full power. And what happened there still lingers in these walls today. The death house, where time ends. Deep inside Sing Sing, past the noise of the cell blocks, beyond the routines and the movement, there was a place where everything stopped. They called it the death house. This wasn't just another section of the prison. It was separate, isolated, deliberately removed from everything else. Because what happened here was different. Men who entered this part of Sing Sing weren't serving time anymore. They were waiting. Waiting for a date. Waiting for a walk. Waiting for an ending they couldn't escape. The death house held those sentenced to execution. And unlike the rest of the prison, there was no illusion here. No hope of release. No possibility of reduction. Just certainty. Each man lived in a small cell, close enough to hear movement, but far enough to feel alone. Days were quieter here. Slower. Because every moment carried weight. Every sound meant something. Footsteps in the corridor could mean nothing. Or, they could mean everything. And the men inside knew the difference. They learned to listen, carefully. Because one day, those footsteps would stop at their door. At the center of the death house was a chair. Simple in design. Wood. Leather straps. Metal contacts. But what it represented was absolute finality. This was where executions were carried out. Not hidden away, not distant. But right here, inside Sing Sing. Men were escorted down that final corridor, step by step, knowing exactly where they were going. There was no confusion. No last-minute uncertainty. Just a walk that every inmate in the prison understood. Because even those who would never face execution knew that path existed. And that knowledge changed everything. The process was controlled, precise, almost mechanical. The inmate would be prepared, secured, guided into the chamber. Witnesses would be present. Officials, medical staff. Everything documented. Everything accounted for. Because even in death, the system demanded order. And then, it would happen. Quick, but not invisible. Final, but never forgotten. Afterward, the prison would return to routine. Meals would continue. Counts would continue. Life would continue. But something lingered. Because death inside Sing Sing wasn't abstract. It wasn't distant or theoretical. It was real. Close enough to feel. Close enough to hear about. Close enough to change the way inmates thought. About their own lives. About their own futures. And for some, about their own end. Today, the executions have stopped. The chair remains. But only as a reminder. A symbol of what this place once was. And maybe, what it still represents. Because even without the death house in operation, Sing Sing hasn't lost its power. It has only changed how that power is used. And what replaced it is something far more complicated. Men who will never leave. Inside Sing Sing, there are men who know exactly when they're leaving. A date. A year. A countdown. But there are others who don't have that. Men serving life sentences. Men whose future doesn't include release. Only continuation. For them, time works differently. At first, they count the years. Then, they stop. Because counting something that never ends eventually loses meaning. So they adapt. Some create routines so strict, they become a kind of structure. Reading, writing, exercising. Not because they have to, but because without it, the days collapse into each other. Others withdraw, minimizing interaction, limiting movement, reducing their world to something they can control. Because control, even in small amounts, is everything here. There are inmates who spend decades inside these walls, and in that time, they change. Not always in ways people expect. Some become quieter, more reflective. They begin to understand their past, not as something distant, but as something that defines every moment of their present. And for some, that realization is heavy. Because there is no escape from it. No distraction strong enough to erase it. Just time, and the space to think. But here's the question most people don't ask. What does a person become when they know they will never leave? Do they hold on to who they were? Or do they become someone else entirely? Inside Sing Sing, the answer isn't simple. Because every inmate finds their own way to survive. And some of those ways are harder to understand than others. Rehabilitation, real change, or coping mechanism. Over time, Sing Sing began to change. Not in its structure, but in its purpose. Programs were introduced. Education, vocational training, creative expression, even theater. At first glance, it seems like progress. An effort to give inmates something more than confinement. Something constructive. But inside Sing Sing, nothing is ever that simple. Because not everyone here is preparing for release. Some are preparing for something else entirely. A lifetime inside these walls. Programs like theater have gained attention. Inmates stepping into roles, telling stories, expressing emotion in ways they otherwise couldn't. For a moment, they are not defined by their crimes. Not defined by their sentences. Just human. And that matters. More than most people realize. Because inside a place built to strip identity, any chance to reclaim it, even briefly, is powerful. But the question remains, is this rehabilitation? Or is it survival? A way to cope with a reality that cannot be changed? For some, it leads to transformation. A genuine shift in how they think, how they see themselves. For others, it's simply a way to pass time. To create moments of meaning, in a place where meaning is often hard to find. And maybe, both can be true at the same time. The weight of the walls. Sing Sing has stood for nearly 200 years. And in that time, it has absorbed everything that's happened inside it. Every decision. Every sentence. Every life changed within these walls. Places like this, they don't forget. Even when the systems evolve, even when the rules change, the weight remains. Because this isn't just a building. It's a history. Layered, complex, and impossible to fully erase. And for the men inside, that history becomes part of their daily lives. Whether they think about it or not. Sing Sing isn't just a prison. It's a system that has outlived generations. A place where punishment, control, and survival exist side by side. Some men leave, carrying the weight of what they experienced. Others never leave at all. And for them, this isn't just where they are. It's what their life has become. Because once those gates close behind you, the world doesn't stop. It keeps moving. Faster than ever. But inside Sing Sing, everything slows. Everything repeats. Everything stays. And maybe the most difficult truth of all? Is that for some men, this place isn't just part of their story. It's the ending. Some stories don't end when the screen goes dark. They stay with you. If this gave you a deeper look into a world most people never see, take a moment to subscribe and share your thoughts below. Where are you watching from, and what part stayed with you the most? Until next time, stay aware.